So, um,
You are on, ma'am. You can start.
a very, very good evening to all of you. On behalf of the Bengal Club, the Bengal Club's president, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, and our library subcommittee and the chair of the subcommittee, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, it is a great pleasure to have with us today such an illustrious gathering. Professor Dr. Nandini Sen, we are so looking forward to discussing your book, and all across the puddles and ponds, from far away Toronto to Hyderabad, Delhi, and our very own Kolkata, our own members. And I'm looking forward to Vivek joining us from Bangalore. I think we can all look forward to a glorious evening. Thanks to dear Professor Dr. Adityanath Sarkar, a good friend who put me in touch with our author, Nandini Sen. I think the fact that they were both erstwhile fellows at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla was the connect, right, Nandini?
Yes.
Yeah. So Nandini Sen comes with a cachet of publications, and she also has a litany of honors. One that I would like to mention is the Charles Wallace Fellowship for Academic Research in London. She's the Ambassador for Peace Prize for her pioneering work in educating slum dwellers. And this is where I think a lot of the pre-event discussions I've had with the members of Bengal Club, who are avid and very critical readers, including Dr. Joytali Moitro and Anju Munshi, Anusuya Pal, Vivek Krishna, Sangeeta Kichlu. We find that NGO spirit, the spirit of finding justice in the most challenging situations, seeps into Nandini's stories. And that's what makes it, as some of my readers have said, so abiding and compelling. Nandini writes on diaspora studies, which is very close to my heart. That's my postdoctoral current kind of work, African studies and comparative literature. Some of her academic publications include The Black Woman Speaks, a study of Flora Nwapa and Buchi Emecheta. Now, Buchi Emecheta, again, Nandini, is someone that I taught for a very long time at the University of Toronto. So I can see, where gender studies is so important to you. And of course, I'm thinking of Choice of Motherhood, which you speak about in so many ways. She's also worked on Through the Diasporic Lens, Volumes 1 and 2, 2017 and 18, and Mahashweta Devi, Critical Perspectives in 2012. Dr. Sen is a keen observer of society, a social commentator, and her short stories have been getting a series of attentive articles, etc., in the past. And of course, the most recent one was, I think, day before yesterday in Telegraph. So very quickly, without wasting too much time, let me just reiterate how we conduct our book clubs. The program, Nandini and all of you, is basically, I'm the bad cop. I'm Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta, and it's a pleasure for me to have conceptualized, curated, and now anchoring the Bengal Club book clubs. We have about 40 minutes at our disposal, Nandini, for our conversation, which should be happy, freewheeling, whatever you like to share with us. And then we will pick up on member responses first, Bengal Club members, 3 minutes each, and then we move on to other scholars, readers, our esteemed members of the audience who will also respond to your book. 3 minutes, please keep to your time limit, and let's start. And I think what's a good place to start is the beginning. So Nandini, you dedicated The Second Wife and Other Stories to, and I quote, all the women whose silence speaks louder than words. Your maternal grandmother and her continent, as you call it, the kitchen, your Didun's area of influence was your classroom. Not to learn how to make shorshe mach or malai curry, but I think it taught you how gender dynamics work in our culture, and you always wondered how patriarchy had seeped like a tea bag into our lives. I'd like to read a little bit from your acknowledgements, and I think that should set us on the right track. And you say, we watched Didun cook while the other women in the household helped her. She would personally serve food to her large family. Day after day, I watched her arrive. I watched her serve the largest pieces of fish to her eldest son, second largest to the next son, then came the grandsons, followed by the granddaughters. In the pecking order, the women would be the last to eat. Neither the men nor the grandsons, nor even the granddaughters, for that matter, ever stayed back to see what the women were eating or whether there was enough food left for them. This set my young mind thinking, why was it always the woman's lot to cook and be the last to eat? Why did she never complain about this clearly unfair equation? So with that question, shall we just open our conversation for the day, Nandini? Let's see what made you get into the nitty-gritty of how women sometimes are forced into situations which are challenging and brutal, and yet they rise to the occasion in different ways to combat that.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much, Julie Day, and this wonderful Bengal Club for having me. And I mean, I'm just so touched and so grateful to be amongst such learned people here. And so yes, and it feels, I don't know, I've never really talked about my grandmother very much in public till I talked about her in the book. And the first person who read it, who read the acknowledgement said that I painted her like a villain. Well, I didn't ever intend to do that because I think as I'm growing older, I'm thinking more and more about her. The reason why I say so is when I was small, we just warred and sparred for most of our life because I thought everything she did was wrong. And she thought everything I did was wrong too, because I didn't conform to whatever her idea of womanhood was. So this fish incident that I talk about is actually quite funny because I wasn't fighting for myself. I don't like to eat fish. I've been told I'm that fraud Bengali which doesn't eat fish. So fish is really not my thing. But day after day, when we visited my Mamad Badi, as it's called, during the summer halls, I would see my Dida serve people, and we ate in batches. So the men were always the first people to eat. Now the eldest male member would get a kashar thala, kashar bati, batis like that, and lots and lots of food. My grandma would sit and fan the gentleman till he finished eating. And and for some reason, in spite of the fact that I was sparring with her at all given points of time, I used to be the only one hanging around the kitchen to see what was going on. So I used to perch myself on a chair with my Enid Blytons, and I used to be seeing things that were happening around me. And sometimes I would see her gulping her food, just, in a household where she's cooked those 500 dishes. She's barely, she just mashes everything together and she gulps her food down in 10 minutes flat and she's done. And then there was a phase when she became a widow, and then she relocated to the Thakur Ghar, where she would do her cooking separately from the rest of the family. And and all of this was her own doing. Nobody told her to do all of this. So she wouldn't eat onions, she wouldn't eat garlic, she wouldn't eat, and obviously no non-veg, and you name it. And she would cook on a separate stove, and she barely ate anything. And I don't know, somehow I was small. I was barely, grade 4, grade 5, I think. But the injustice of it all somehow seemed to seep in. And I think what worried me even more was that I was the only one seeing the injustice there. Nobody else seemed to be protesting. Nobody else seemed to think that this was all wrong. And that, I think, set my young mind thinking that there was obviously so much wrong here, but I seem to be the only one thinking that there was something wrong. And I think...
And obviously, sorry, Nandini, yeah. Obviously this must have stayed with you through your growing years, and you saw this sort of injustice, gendered injustice in so many walks of life.
Absolutely. So as one grew older and studied and had the right words to express oneself, I think that is where I started situating the wrongs and started seeing, and started talking about it, started worrying about it. Yeah. As a child, I was only rebelling or reacting in a certain way, and everybody thought it was childish tantrum, and I was just spoiled, including my grandmother.
Yes.
When I would take up cudgels on her behalf, she treated me like a spoiled child. And that was that. So
Nandini, just to give a contrast of the fact, your Dadu, your grandfather, seems to be someone that I see a synchronity with my father, who was a gynecologist. Mm-hmm. And my father knew very well, with his own lived experience, which he shared without sharing the identities of the people, that no matter how rich or poor you are or middle class you were, the problems women faced were the same. Yes. So will you tell us, since you shared about your Didun, will you share this about your Dadu, your grandfather, your maternal grandfather, who really was more a feminist than women who are feminists?
Yes, so that was my paternal grandfather, actually. And this is my maternal grandma I'm talking about. So, it's like we lived in two different spheres. And my paternal grandfather lived with us for most of his life. And he had these bookcases full of books, encouraged me to read. So my reading was, whatever I found in his almirah of books, I would read. It was completely unstructured, particularly my Bengali reading. I just picked up books arbitrarily and read. I was encouraged to read and to sit in his room so that I didn't have to do any housework or learn any housework. So it was completely different from how the maternal uncle's place would be. And I think that's why the contrast was also very much there for me to worry about. But then again, like I said, I couldn't talk about it to anybody. The elderly people, the elders of the family didn't take it very seriously. And I wasn't encouraged to talk about it at all. So you would promptly be put in your place and asked to shut up. So I think probably the reading that I was doing, or probably, with my grandpa, we used to be discussing women characters. We used to be talking about the epics. We used to be talking about just about anything. So one thing I knew from the beginning, that I was allowed to argue and I could argue. But in another space, I was told summarily that no argument is allowed. And also that argument, or that space that Dadu and I had created for ourselves was limited to his room. even my parents would have nothing of it. They said I was completely spoiled, and what on earth would become of me, and stuff like that. So it was, as a child, I think I was trying to make sense of all of this. And then I took recourse to books, and I think that was my escape route. So I escaped, and I became a five find outer or a famous five or something else. And I didn't inhabit my world at all. And much later in life, I think only when I went to JNU, I won't even say this happened during my undergrad. During the undergrad, one was learning things, absorbing things, learning theories, but really not sort of using them to understand your life or to understand things around you. I think only during my master's in JNU is when I started looking at life very differently. And that is when I think I found words, like I keep saying. That's the time when I had words to describe the situation, and I could talk about it.
Nandini, what occurs to many of your readers is that now when we join the dots, after speaking to you about your maternal grandmother, is that you learned pretty quick, and you learned pretty early, that matriarchy was a kind of patriarchy that was perpetuated.
Oh, yes.
I think many of your stories, whether we are talking about Navunita, whether we are talking about Mrs. Roy in the Santhal, the story of the Santhal girl, you understand that women are in cahoots. They are almost collaborators in a very strange way. And I think that makes it very interesting that the stories resonate across social stratifications, across, even across cultures. So we'll be hearing about that from our readers in a little while. But my next question to you is, and I quote you, the first lines of the Sapphire Ring, the first story in your book: we tend to cohabit with our past. As I was telling you before we started, a theorist and a scholar of memory studies from IIT Chennai, who set up the project in IIT, Professor Abhishek Parui, in his newest book called Culture and the Literary, says, and I quote, he talks about Derrida, and he says that in the Derridian term, the entanglement of the possible and the fantastic articulated by form and fiction makes storytelling and the slippages so distinctly a place of possibility. So, you will inevitably get comments today, I feel, from your readers who will point out that, hey, Nandini, how come some of your endings are not all tight and, God's in heaven, all's right with the world, or God's not in heaven, all's not right with the world? You leave a lot of it, for your readers to make sense of. So, Nandini, how would you connect this point about the entanglement of fiction and fabuloso with this idea? Is that why you sort of leave the doors open?
Yes, Julie, very much, because personal histories, call them fiction, call them a personal memoir, since you were talking about Abhishek Parui. A lot of work that is being done vis-a-vis partition or vis-a-vis memories that we wish to keep and erase at the same time. Storytelling where we do more of erasure than of telling.
Yes.
That, I think, is true for all of us. When you construct a story, you and put your personal angle into it, and you put personal people, people who are recognizable or people who are known. There is a lot that you're not telling, and there is something that you're telling and you're trying to hide quite a bit, and maybe your readers find it, maybe they don't. And then when you talk about closures, I think all I did was I was realistic to my genre. I was realist as a person. and stuck to what I understand as social realism. So life doesn't give you neatly tied and a nicely tied little bundle as a closure. You don't have that kind of closures. Life doesn't allow you that. So all that I allow my characters to have is a certain kind of dignity, a certain kind of agency, and a certain foot forward that they're able to take. Nothing beyond it, because you can't win. You can't win all your battles suddenly. That would be bizarre. I mean, even Maggie Tulliver had to die. So Elliot didn't know what to do with her. So you can't, if you had Maggie Tulliver winning, they might have burned the book at stake.
Yes.
If you had her losing, the book would be lost. So suddenly she drowns. So, so a lot of, and when you look at characters around you, I mean, are they take one step, and particularly women, you might take one step forward and you take two backwards, and then and that trajectory kind of continues. So I cannot have this instant victory and this instant sort of thing that people might be looking for. Maybe if, you know, some people have been saying that we see germinations of novels here, we see the seeds. It needs to become a novel. Maybe if it becomes a novel, any of these stories, maybe I see the character growing, and maybe there could be a closure. I don't know. As of today, I'm unable to find a closure.
Right. Perfectly. I mean, justified in your explanation. I do want to push you a little bit, though. The characters in your book, Neeta, for instance, in The Performer. My favorite, of course, is Vinay in Lipstick. These characters, to me, seem to be wanting to talk back to the center. People from the fringes, even Geeta in The Sapphire Ring. She is a part of the Naxalite movement. She's not a leader. She doesn't make the decisions. So if you look at the feminist theorists, what spoke to me very much from your stories, and again, I will wait for people such as Raka perhaps to pick up on this, and perhaps Dr. Choitali Moitro, theorists.
Have I lost Julidi, or has...
No, there's nothing to worry. She will be back online.
I think the rest of us are on.
Yeah, we could. I was just going to say that, maybe we could take this.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she will be online just within a few seconds. She's having problems.
I can see her.
Perhaps you can just say a little bit, Nandini, while we wait for Julie.
There's a broadband connectivity issue. She's joining in 10 seconds.
Okay.
Ma'am, you are on mute. Julie, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. So till I get back on my laptop, I'm using Harish's phone. So let's carry on, Nandini. So we were at that point where I was asking you about, the challenges that women faced and the feminist theorizing that can be done with your work. So also looking at issues of sexual orientation, And we've done Shyam Selvathurai's novel, Funny Boy.
Yeah.
I think we spoke about this briefly in another webinar you did. Would you like to comment about how you came upon these characters and what really made you want to portray them in your stories, Nandini?
Yeah, so the first question before you went off, you were talking about women who had internalized patriarchy. You see them all around you. And, one thing, particularly because I've lived up north now for so long, I've been told that the Bengali women are positively vicious. They are excessively dominating. There's everything wrong with it. And so on and so forth. And I kind of love to wear it like a badge of honor. But that said, you have a Mrs. Roy or we are completely used to having matriarchs in our families. But then many of the matriarchs of the family have internalized patriarchy so much to such an extent that they, with an iron hand, carry on the age-old traditions or their own whatever traditions that they have, and they carry forward with that, which is extremely disturbing. And when you talk about a boy like Vinay and why I talk about him now, in all of my stories, there is some part of that story or some character in that story that I know or know of, and the rest is fictitious. So I have to be very honest that I do not know a character like Vinay per se, but I do know, and I know friends who've had very difficult times coming out, being able to talk. But then I didn't want to talk about the men who are not able to talk or the LGBTQ community, which has not been able to communicate. I didn't want the story to be per se about them. I wanted to talk about the mother. I wanted to talk about the mother's inability to understand. And somewhere I think, though of course, I cannot make that comparison. Hajat Churashi's Ma is a way superior work. But when I was watching the Govind Nihalani version of the film, I think it came to me very, very strongly that here was this mother trying to figure out why her son had turned out to be the way he had turned out. And I think somewhere that remained with me, the mother's quest to understand her son. And then I tried to put in, and then things which I know and understand, a library, a person researching, and so on and so forth. So I tried to put all of that together, but I wanted to make it the mother's quest. And if you remember the ending, I say, she came out of the closet. I do not talk about him, I talk about her, because the quest becomes the mother's, because I do see a lot of women not being able to understand their children at all. And sometimes they make an effort and they fail. Sometimes they don't even make an effort because they succumb to societal pressures. It does not need to be an LGBTQ situation. It can be anything, because there are all these pressures. Aapka beta ye nahi kar raha, aapki bachchi ye nahi kar rahi, so we have so much of that around us. So I wanted to make it a quest for a mother who's lost her child. And then she tries to understand that child. And then there is Joy, who enters into the equation and helps her do it. So I think I basically live by these two things. So I'm talking agency of my women characters, and I'm talking about sisterhood, a much maligned concept. I mean, all my life I've grown up, and maybe all of you have heard this too. A woman is a woman's worst enemy, sabse buri dushman, or, I have heard that endlessly. And somebody says that, I want to scream most of the time, because the women that I see around me are women who are holding us, we are holding each other up. And we are progressing because we are able to hold each other up. And this myth, this thing needs to be demythicized. So I think that's something that comes across in the story, that the concept of sisterhood and then the agency. So yeah, that's what I was
absolutely. Nandini, the question about the author being in the text is not new. So we have someone like Michael Bakhtin talking in Dialogic Imagination. about the fact that, the author is never absent from the text. That is one argument. And I'm just trying to theorize and see how you situate yourself as an author, which is very interesting to your readers. We don't get an opportunity unless we speak with an author to know how your mind works. So there on the one side, you have Michael Bakhtin talking about that the fact that the author never really leaves the text. And on the other side, you have Roland Barthes saying that, with the death of the author comes the birth of the reader.
Yeah.
So where exactly do you think lies the truth? Is it somewhere in between, or how do you see yourself?
See, I would go with Barth, because I feel, once you've published, you need to die. It is with the readers now to do what they will with the text. Of course, you feel happy if they speak well. I'll be devastated if people say it's trashy. But that said, you can't be an author like Jane Austen, who keeps popping out of her text to tell you how to think. Like she'll tell you Colin is an idiot. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that. So you would want to take those millions of steps back and just present the work and leave it for the author, leave it for the readers to look at it as they will. All this bit about, the personal information coming in, or my commenting on that, or, these are all extraneous things. We are having a one-on-one, so we are talking about it. But when the reader picks up the book to read, she does not really need to know the author at all, is what I feel. The book needs to be able to, or the stories need to be able to stand on their own, and they need to be able to speak to the reader. And as far as the author being or not being in the text, now that is that is very difficult. So you have Brecht, who wanted as much distance as is possible between his audience and the text. And I remember this, one of the Monday House performances where Mohan Agashe had played Mother Courage. So they took that extra step of, so they took that extra step of having a man play a woman so that you could achieve that distance. But even with that, one was so drawn into the text. So I don't know if that distancing is at all possible, which every author seems to be urging us towards. But whether that really gets done or not is a very difficult question to answer. So yeah, I don't know.
That's a fair answer. Okay. That's a fair answer. Nandini, once again, tell us something about your writing process. So in your mind, someone like Michael Ondaatje, in interviews, other authors have said that they think in images. So for the English Patient, he saw the image of a nurse speaking to a patient in the middle of the night. Other authors have said that they draw on a plot. Yet other authors say they don't draw on anything. They just begin to write. How is it with you? How do you work on a writing process? Do you have a process, or how?
Yeah, I mean, that is the last bit. Do I have a process? No. Am I a systematic and organized writer? No, but I'm aspiring. I'm really hoping against hope that one day I shall reach there. But I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. And even the most mundane incidents, I'm able to make a nice story out of it. I remember my hostel roommate and my very, very dear friend. She says I spoiled every movie for her, because if I watched a movie, I would come back and relate that, like I was doing a Thousand Night or something, like every dialogue, every song, and I would try and act a bit. She says after that, she didn't want to go and watch it in a theater, because she got a live performance which would last over several days. So I am this quintessential storyteller, and pretty much every child's delight. I can start a story immediately from out of nowhere and create a story instantly. So that I think I do. But as far as being that organized writer, no. We have a bit of a disturbance here. I think she's trying to connect from both devices.
Is it better now?
Please continue. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear? Yeah, okay,
Yes, I
thank
can
you.
now. So yeah, as far as a process, no, I so wish I had one. I
Good.
mean, I wish I could intelligently speak about a process. I unfortunately don't.
No, you're probably going to get to that at some stage, or maybe you won't. Who knows?
But I have 1 million stories in my head, even as I'm
Yes.
talking to you.
Yes.
So
So Nandini, tell us, how much time did it take you from the conception, from the brain to the page?
oh, it took me a while. Like I said, I wasn't comfortable sharing my stories because, see, our discipline trains us to be critics.
Yes.
So everything that I write, I'm reading 500 times over and completely, finding it not up to the mark. And therefore, I will delete passages. I'll delete entire pages. Only now I've learned not to delete them. I would just say, oh my God,
Yes.
this is so trashy, and just get rid of it. So it took me a lot of time to be able to put pen to paper or to be able to write anything and feel confident enough to share it with anybody. Forget about a publisher. Even with my immediate family, I would feel very, very conscious. Of course, my immediate family, both my son and my husband kept telling me that they were really good and, I need to work on them. But I obviously don't believe them. So I chose not to trust them. And then, so anyways, to cut a long story short, it took me a while. And then OM took their own time, and then there was pandemic. So the whole process, I think, good 3 years from
Right.
when it was kind of done
Right.
to when it got published. So
Right.
it's taken me a while.
Nandini, what has been the biggest challenge for you? Because is this I assume it's your first book
Yes.
of short stories, right?
Yes,
So it's your first piece of fiction. What was the biggest challenge that you faced?
The biggest challenge was being able to share it. I think that was by far the biggest challenge.
Why?
To be able to
Why?
trust myself enough to be able to, I don't know. It was like, it was something that I did surreptitiously and secretly. Don't ask me why. But I was this quintessential critic. I was writing academic books. I was writing academic, that I saw myself only as an academic.
Right.
I did not see myself as a storyteller or anything for that matter. So I think the biggest hurdle was being able to let go. I wasn't ready to do it for a very long time. So the gestation was, for the longest period of time, till some close friends took matters into their own hands, and they said, this needs, you leave it to us. So that's when it happened. Otherwise, I think I would have just written, rewritten, edited, deleted, I don't know what. So
anyway, what you seem to be, the place that you're at now is that it's been a liberating process.
It is.
And I am sure that we would expect your next collection maybe, or maybe a novel or a novella coming out in a short time. And to women's issues. That's really, I think you have already built up a readership. And a lot of people, what I've heard in the feedback seems to be that the stories are accessible. Maybe some would say they are too easy, maybe would like to make the language a little bit more complex. These issues really don't bother a writer, because a writer writes from a place where they want to write. Yeah. You're not writing to please anybody. If in the process you have pleased anybody, that's great. But what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I like I said, So these are issues, what I talk about or what I write about. I talk about things that I'm seeing around me. I talk about issues that I'm negotiating with. I write with a lot of anger. Maybe I would have liked to write a piece in a newspaper, but I cannot for various reasons. So I write fiction about it. So in a sense, like when you say liberating, I would say I am able to channelize my anger and my angst into fiction. And that is liberating for me. So, and you're very right when you say, I'm not per se writing for anybody. So if people have picked it up and if people are saying that they are happy with what I've written, I'm happy. As far as the language is concerned, again, I've heard these pros. I've not heard too many cons. Most people say from an academic, we expected very complex things, but we were so happy to see that it was simple and lucid. So maybe my thought process is simple. I don't know. I mean, again, like I said, none of this is of my own doing, or none of this is crafted. It all happened.
Absolutely. Nandini, I think that's a great note to open the floor up. And it's my great pleasure. I know we have a lot of people here who are waiting, and we are waiting to hear their responses. So once again, I'll be the bad cop and just admonish you on that 3-minute mark so that Nandini and all of us get to hear multiple voices, as many as possible tonight. So let's start with Dr. Professor Choitali Moitro opening the floor. We will first have the Bengal Club members and then our esteemed guests who are here. So Choitali, looking forward, go right ahead.
Hello, madam. Hello, everyone. And thanks, Julie Dee, for giving me this chance. I did have my own sort of reactions to the book, and it was a very positive one. But listening to the author, after listening to the conversation, 2 or 3 points have definitely crossed my mind. One is that she's trying to establish that strength does not come without tears. That is the first premise she sort of clarifies for the readers. The second point is that she takes one particular layer of truth for one particular woman, even if they do not belong to one story. What I'm trying to say is that there might be many women in a story and one very important. So for each woman, there is a layer of truth. And this is what you say, madam, in the story on Koikei, that truth has many layers. That was something which I liked very much. And the third point, I would say that you have addressed women, characters, situations, which usually have something to do with marriage and motherhood. Maybe a day would come when your genius will look at another reduced aspect of womanhood, which is widowhood. Just best wishes for that. And apart from this, the strength that we see in Bella, the strength that we see in the story called Deliverance that the hidden mother shows is just very, very impressive. Regarding the endings, I thought there is an element of translatability, very similar to what is meant by Stephen Greenblatt. And that is one reason why I think you are offering your sense of poetic justice to the end of these stories, after which I don't think I, as a reader, will have the liberty to question your poetic justice. I must give you that sort of right to deal with your characters. And again, the final point I would like to make is that there is a body and mind fight constantly in your stories, which makes Judith Butler spring to my mind with the idea of quote unquote gender performativity. And this is, I think, much, much more evident in the present system of sort of existential crisis that I think most women face, each and every one of us go through. And in spite of all this, I would end my sort of comment by saying that what has really surprised me is that you have such a wide angle reading from Buchi Emicheta to Mahashita Devi. And yet while reading your stories, constantly the name which kept peeping in my mind, being a Bengali, I think the Bengali pulse is stronger than the other pulse in your stories, is Ashapurna Devi, Kachputi Hire. So finally, I would like to say that all your Noras have managed to leave their doll's house. Best of luck to you, madam, for everything.
Gosh, thank you so much, Professor. Your words mean so much. And yes, I will look at widowhood. I've seen widowhood also very, very closely. And you're absolutely right. I think in my next work, that is something I will definitely. And thank you so much for your very kind observations.
Thanks, Choitali. As usual, on point. Again, the question of whose truth, and who is telling that. Everybody has a different perception of truth, and you brought that out really well. So comprehensive and very full of collateral. Mrs. Anju Munshi, if you're here with a background of psychology, we would love to hear your views.
Thank you so much.
3 minutes, please. Anju, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Lovely.
Can you hear me?
Great. Yes.
Okay. A warm welcome to Dr. Nandini Sen. I think it was nice to go through your stories, and women have long been the subject of discussion, from being oppressed and subjugated to being independent and fiery. We've read them all, and gender interpretation and identification has, changed over the years, and has been influenced by the societal stereotypes of women. And it was nice to see you address, two very important issues of, gender and sexual liberation in a way, that kind of a thing. Having said that, the second wife stories are very close to our city's culture and ethos, which was a very nice thing to read. And I could identify myself with most of the, the kitchen things and the rituals happening in the household. So that was interesting. There are some thought-provoking situations, interesting family and society dynamics. With every story, we are led to an intensity that heightens our sense of expectation. Our expectancy goes up, reaches a crescendo, and then suddenly disintegrates. That's my personal experience. And then we are left picking up the pieces and trying to put them all together. Like you said, there's an open-ended closure, not a closure, but an open-ended thing, which is the license that is given to the writer. There are gender stereotypes. The women are virtually, the women are virtuous and emotionally fragile, and men are aggressive and dominant. And the portrayal of women has changed over the years. It's a shade better than what it was, yesterday. And I missed seeing the woman with more powers and with a better and a stable mind of her own. That was something which I really miss reading. I don't know why Shobha Day comes to my mind. There is no relevance or coherence right now, but there is a non-conventional element in the women characters in her story. Even Chetan Bhagat, for that matter. He tries to put a kind of an equality. There is no longer the idea of the woman walking behind a man, not even half a step, and he makes them into the bearers of the social change, and he also wants them to be equal with men in all this thing. So Nabamita was gullible, Bella was strong yet suppressed, Bulki was an escapist, and Lala a shadow of her sister, because her super hit sister, Mona. I missed, the imagery was very nice. The narrative was simple and appealing, but I missed the free-spirited, fun-loving, independent woman. So please make sure that, the woman is no longer living in the shadows of her, regressive family. She's no longer what she used to be 100 years ago. She's come a long way. She has a mind of her own. She's free-spirited. She's got equal powers than men. I miss that particular character in the story, most of the stories. I think that is where I would like to finish and end. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Anju. Thank you.
Thank you so
Honest,
much.
straight from the heart, and a positive critical response. What do you think, Nandini?
Absolutely, very well taken critique. And in fact, one of my male professors had this to say that where are the good men? Oh, barring Jochon, I didn't find a good man, and I don't like it. He told me. So absolutely, what Miss Munshi says, I'm completely in agreement. However, I really wish I knew these women who are absolutely at par, because I don't. Maybe I'm not sounding, or maybe at the cost of sounding a tad dark. See, I teach gender studies. I teach in a liberated space where we are educating women and men. Very often this question has come up that, what we preach, we teach in feminism, what we preach, do we practice? Believe you me, 99% of my colleagues would say no. I don't even know if there is that 1% which will say a yes. So while we like to believe that we have evolved, for sure, we dress how we like, our marriages are not places where people are killing us or beating us back black and blue, but have we achieved that quote unquote equality which Chetan Bhagat and Shobha Dev might be talking about? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do not think so. But then again, a point very well taken. I do need to talk about women who are, of a different kind.
Yeah.
So that will happen by and by, I guess.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, Anju. As always, on target. Don't mince words, and yet you put it all, right on the table. Anusuya, would love to hear your views. Go right ahead. Hi.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Good evening, and good evening, Nandini. It's so nice to be hearing the context behind you writing this book. And I have to say that for the first time, I think the story spoke variously to me. And however, I would also like to say that I like Anju also said, I did miss the male feminist presence in the book, but I like the fact that you showcased the Indian, or perhaps more the Bengali woman's arena of being subjected to various layers of patriarchy, and how while you did speak of the sisterhood agency coming in to assist her to find her space back and claim back to her life, but the assistance of Mrs. Chatterjee or a Mrs. Roy in making her life difficult was also something that you can't miss, and because it gives credence to that statement, that women make women's worst enemies. And that appeared so strongly because of the way that the abuse of the protagonist in the story was so assisted by another woman, a strong woman, who could very well have been a strong agency of change with the power that she had in the story. So yes, that was something that I wanted to put down. And also, like you have mentioned yourself, that Jochon was perhaps the only one who was assigned a certain hope in the stories. And I felt that he should have been amplified in the narrative. And his voice could have been heard at the end, or towards when the girl was going through abuse, because he had been a supportive father, a daughter should ordinarily have turned to help her out of her situation. But that was kind of not there, and that absence kind of put men in a kind of not so nice light. So I'm sure in our society we have patriarchy, but we also have very strong feminist men who support daughters and women in general, promote their wives to express themselves. And that could also have been given some space. But as Dr. Chaitali Roy mentioned about widowhood, I think Thami was a great description of a strong woman who expressed herself and really blossomed into a bigger personality, perhaps maybe what was not said was evident in the story by way of any curtailing that marriage may have had on her, and so that her achievements post widow, I mean, while she was a widow, were commendable. And that was a nicely showcased identity of a woman. And as regards the open-endedness, I think maybe the author was telling us that this is like from one station to another station, this has been a journey. And subsequently, there will be various hues to her journey. And that is for us to imagine, or maybe she can come with a novella later carrying on from where she left off. Who knows? But yeah, on the whole, a very interesting read, and looking forward to something more from you in the future.
Thank you, Anusuya.
Thank you. All points very well taken.
Thank you, Nandini.
Okay, so now I'm looking for Vivek. Vivek, are you here? Vivek Krishna?
Yeah, I'm here, Julie.
Wonderful, wonderful, Vivek. Always buoys me up to see that you've made an effort all the way from Manila. Okay, go for it.
Well, thank you very much, Julie, and a big welcome to Nandini to be coming out and being with us this evening. Congratulate her for throwing back her self-imposed restraints and coming out in print. And I have read comments on people learning a new skill, painting, for instance, or photography, about having a severe reluctance to sharing their offerings, which never look or feel good enough. And you keep comparing yourself against maybe the great masters and think that, okay, that, I might as well consign this to the rubbish box. But yeah, the first step is the one that will takes you forward, and it's good to get feedback from people you don't know, because you're not saying they're only carrying me because they know me and they're trying to protect me from the harsher world outside. However, having said that, I have to admit that my first reading of the collection of short stories left me feeling a little dissatisfied. It's not from the content and the focus, because I feel that as a reader, I was left hanging in a number of the stories and wondering what had caused me to feel the way I did. The thread that runs through the compilation is a self-confessedly feminist, women-centric stories that describe various coming-of-age scenarios and examining the gender dynamics, relationships, and abuse that average Indian women are exposed to face on a daily basis. And Aruna Chakravarti at the back of the book describes it as written in lucid, simple, unpretentious prose, and opening a window to the reality of the past and present. So my take is not with the content, but more with the use of language and imagery. Because I feel that an author at work is an artist and starts to use all the colors he or she has to create a world in order to hold the reader in the palm of the hand and to suspend disbelief. And I found that some of the ways the story is told was, I began to lose interest. I think, an image like she was strikingly beautiful and had inherited her mother's chiseled features and her father's innate business sense is perhaps too broad a description. And Sarah strokes Bruno's head affectionately with her perfectly manicured fingers. Yeah, she found herself telling him about her parents called her Nabo, while at school she called her Nita. There, her biggest secret had been divulged. The tightrope she walked between the two worlds, Nobo and Nita. Nobo and Nita were the same person. And then later in that story, she says she has chosen a weapon well. This boti's blade was sharpened regularly, and in the Datta Chaudhary household, this boti had cut and shaped several kinds of fish and vegetables, but this was the first time it had drawn human blood. Unafraid, Nobonita pulled her side tightly around her frail body and continued walking briskly on the cobbled streets of the familiar city, is the way the story ends. To me, I was, as I said, I was left hanging, because that's not where the story really does end. What happens to Nobonita? I was really interested to know what happened to Nobonita. Did she end up as one of those crazed women you see on so many sidewalks in Calcutta, hair loose, sometimes undressed because she's lost her mind. And I would have expected Nobanita, something like that to happen to Nobanita. So I think there is a place that you can go with those stories. And what has been mentioned before also, that sometimes it was a little staccato. In fact, for this story on Nobanita, I turned the page and I thought there was more to come. And I looked back again and read the story again and said, actually, you're finishing it here. But I really thought that there was a lot more that was to be taken with Nobanita, the way she's going to be deal with the rest of her life that has come from a very traumatic experience. And similarly, there's the story in The Second Wife, when the description is that Champa Rani was as fair as the eponymous Champa fool, with a face that resembled goddess Durga's. And Bela was darker than her sister and had a chiseled face shone with a unique glow. Her hair cascaded down to her waist. The firmness of her body and her dark, evocative eyes bestowed a touch of sensuality on her. These are, I would say, this is an outside picture of the characters in The Second Wife. And I think, if you'll allow me, I think this is where perhaps in the future you need to go in being able to fill in the outside, just the outline picture, and perhaps more in what's in the mind of the protagonist, because that can be as ugly or as beautiful as the physical reality of it. Having said that, as I said, I would go back and again and congratulate you on coming out here and being prepared to listen to people who may not be 100% on your side, and congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I'm so happy you're saying this, and this gives me a much needed perspective. I mean, I know when with my laid back writing style, I do come up with something, these are things which I will obviously remember and try to correct or try to rectify. Though whether I'll come up with a closure or not, I cannot say. But the other point is very well taken.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivek. This surely, in my experience, is an unusual interaction between writer and reader. And I thank you both for the discourse and the maturity with which you both enjoined upon this exercise. Fabulous. Love you both. Thank you. Sangeeta, are you on board? Lovely. Come. Let's hear what you have to say.
Good evening, and it's indeed a pleasure to have Dr. Nandini Sen. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, Julie, for choosing this book. Yes, it was, I enjoyed the book. I found the language, after all the books we've read in the past, very simple, but it spoke to you because it was simple. It was a very, on a 1:1, like as if the author was conversing with us. So I enjoyed that simple language. Yes, coming back to the negatives, what I missed was the lack of imagery. Even the households, etc. There was a lack of imagery. Having said that, it was generally about the woman who takes charge of her life and defines her own destiny. And although there were 11 stories, I found a lot of commonality between the various stories. A lot of them were set in Bengal. A lot of them were middle-class Bengalis. And of course, as everybody has said, the lack of closure was something that kind of, I don't know whether it puzzled me or whether but yes, it was a very significant factor in all of the stories. And like Vivek said, I was turning the next page and said, oh, what now? And there was nothing. The stories also took very unexpected turns. And I think in a way that was interesting. Although set in India, it's, I think the issues are quite universal, especially in countries like Africa, say, child marriage, child abuse, Nobanita, for example, gender divide. And it was all about people from everyday life. So it was very relatable. It could have been, it could have been one of our families, like Vinay, of course, like you. Vinay was my favorite character. And you see many Vinays nowadays. So the situation was very relatable. And okay, so I said each story left me with a question mark. And yes, I would have liked to see a closure. The endings were always open-ended. And what I liked is it also took you across generations, like Kammi, you know, in Rasool, whatever that Rasool Nagar or wherever she was in the suburbs of Calcutta, in a home like that, she was very liberated, you know. So Kammi is one person I admire, that she found her calling, being a widow. She found her calling at a very early age, which her educated granddaughter took much longer to find. I mean, she was a lawyer in London. She came back, and it took her much longer to realize what her calling was. So I like Kammi the character. And yeah, that's about it. And,
thank you. Thank you, Sangeeta.
It was an enjoyable read. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was on point, and you know, you as usual, you're always textually oriented, so you brought up some great points. Nandini, what's your response? All good?
I am so happy with each response. You know, it is like you are being kind enough to open a window and allow me to think ahead. And you know, I don't often get very many reader responses, barring people saying, "Oh, very nice, we enjoyed." You know, so I'm so happy to get this critical sort of analysis that you guys are doing, and then. Yeah, I mean, so if when there is a next volume or there is a next novel, I will definitely keep this in mind. I think here, what you say, the point about why is it not more descriptive, though this is not an excuse, but I did have that word limit of 3,000 words sort of on my, you know, and that was kind of ticking. And I'll tell you why that 3,000, because I think this whole ball was set rolling when I had sent a story for a competition and it actually won an award. And I think that's when I started thinking, oh, they're good enough. You know, so that competition told me that the stories need to be of 3,000 words. So then I stuck to my 3,000 word limit, and I would not make it into a 3,500 because I was sort of, you know, that 3,000 sort of stayed with me, that this is how much you're supposed to write. So yeah, but that's no excuse for not writing more. But yes, point absolutely well taken. I think I should flesh out my characters more, flesh out the surroundings more. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, with great pleasure and honor, we open the floor up to our audience, our esteemed guests who've taken the trouble to be with us. First off, let's have Dr. Professor Ajunta Dotto, who's a PhD is from Rutgers University in the US. She's been teaching in Delhi University forever. And she is my dear, dear friend and colleague. We both were chuddy buddies, as we say, at Loreto House in Kolkata. Ajunta, go for it.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Really, the end of it. Loreto days can never be forgotten. And also, thank you, Nandini, for inviting me here again. I've been looking at this book every once in a while, talking about it, and also discussing with a number of people. And what I would really like to start with is this concept of a few good men. And I think, yes, there are a few good men in the book, in the various stories. For instance, the story of Laila, although I questioned it, I wondered about the husband, I wondered why he had to go to those extensive tricks in order to make his wife, you know, sort of come out of her shell. But it seems that that is one good man whom we have over there. The first story, of course, affected me very deeply the first time I read it, because Nandini was going back to Kolkata days, our days, Presidency College, and I actually remember people who were like Raghav Banerjee. And he also seems to be a very good man, an inspiration for Geeta. And I hope that there will be a story about Geeta also coming up, because there were lots of women who, if not directly leaders, but they did take on leadership mantles in the Naxalite movement. Actually, as I read Nandini's stories, I was struck by some things which seemed symbolic to me, and they were not really explained, but I hope that they will. One is that she's got 11 stories in the book, and 11 is a kind of an interesting number when we think of, giving 11 takar pujo. Also, recently I saw that Sudha Murthy had also included 11 stories in the life stories that she does for Devdasis and sex workers in her book, 3000 Stitches. So 11 seemed an interesting number. Similarly, in the first story, the sapphire ring. Why the sapphire ring? Is it because the Neela sapphire is supposed to bring bad luck, and so the brother himself turns informer on Raghu Banerjee? So you see, there were all these things that were coming. And of course, the cat in Laila's story. Why does the story begin with the cat and end with the cat? But having said that, I want to also talk about the story of Koikoi, which really pleased me immensely, because if you look away from the epical context, what she says to those little boys, especially to her own son, Bharat, when they are playing, and she claims that Ram is her son. Well, that is the setting for the ideal joint family, the Jyotho Parivar, where the cousins were not really known separately as belonging to several mothers, the Kakimas or the Jethimas, but they were all like Boro, Mejo, Choto. And so that really struck me. And also the end of the story, that particular story struck me, because there seems to be this very, very good man, Matungo, who is going to wait for Koikei well after her time here on earth. Now we know that on earth, the Ramayana and her role in it is never going to be forgotten, and Koikei's term on earth, for as long as we remember her, is going to be fraught with all these other stories of what a vicious woman she was, and what she did to her quote unquote her eldest son. But he says in the end, the narrator, and I quote from the book, "Meanwhile, Koikei, till your earthly duties are done, I will wait for you in these harsh but pure mountains. There will be no greater redemption for my sin of silence than my soul merging with yours." So I think that that is a wonderful conclusion, a closure, because we are hopeful that she will find that ultimate romance, that ultimate protection, which she doesn't have in her life here on earth. And similarly, in the story, the second wife, the fact that she does go out and she goes and joins the procession of the freedom fighters. Again, the last line is very important. And I quote again, "But in the confines of her room, the old and frail Kusum shed tears of joy. At last, her Bela was free." Again, I'm not quoting this just because this is the mother and daughter bonding, and the fact that even if other people have not understood, it is her mother who has understood why she needed to do this, why Bela needed to step out. What I also want to stress is that I think in all the decisions we make, especially the women of these stories, we need to have someone somewhere endorsing it. And therefore, I think in these kinds of stories, the minor characters become very, very important. So I really want to congratulate Nandini on what you have done in this book. Yes, there are germs for many novels, I think. There are several characters here who should go on to their own stories. And I do hope that just like you've done a story on Koike, you will also do one on Urmila, Lachlan's wife, or maybe even Bharut's wife, whom we don't even ever hear about. Okay. Thank you, Julie,
Thank you
and
so
thank you,
much,
Nandini,
Ajanta
for
Di.
bringing
Thank
me
you
on.
very much. Thank you, Ajanta. That was, your take and, a very strong voice of hope and promise, and women to be the light. I think that's what Nandini had set out to do. And as a first collection of stories, Nandini, I think Ajanta has quite rightly given you that beacon to say, yes, it's going to get better all the time.
Actually, I think she knows the book now better than me, because she's been reading it, critiquing it, writing about it, and yeah. So thank you for bearing me out and thinking of all these male characters who I couldn't think of. She had them down pat, that they were all there. Because yeah, I do. I am luckily surrounded by feminist men, and the book is a result of my having feminist male friends. So no way am I going to not say that or not talk about them. But I think these stories were about women. So maybe there weren't too many of them. But yeah, next time they will all be there.
Thank you, Nandini. All right, Dr. Smita Kothari, my friend from the University of Toronto, are you there?
Smita,
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute
yourself.
myself. Yes, I did. Thank you, Nandini, for a very refreshing book. I will say much has been said through the rest of the speakers, but for me, the lucid, simple narrative was a plus to your work. And the fact that the descriptive, the critique that has been made, I kind of chalked it off as it's a short story format. Maybe you're limited, as you said, by the 3,500 word limit. But I have to say, I told Julie that I read the book in cover to cover in half a day, because I just couldn't put it down. And as a religious studies scholar, I was kind of thinking your theme about gender and gender studies and women's lives circumscribed by, I was thinking about Manu's quote about in chapter 2, I think I could probably recite the verse, but in loose paraphrasing, women should be protected always, in childhood by her father, in adulthood by her husband, and in widowhood by her son. And what does that protection engender women is often what I wonder. And people have said there are liberated men, but I know that the stories resonated. Growing up, I had many friends who said, whether it was an uncle or close family friend, whatever, the power dynamics you've outlined are so just spot on. And to say that women have space, maybe for some women, there is space to come home and say that. But growing up, I'm in a different generation than you. I know that there wasn't one single friend to whom this happened who could have come home and said what happened. Because it would be the whatever freedom they had was going to be curtailed, or at least that was the perception. Maybe they wouldn't, but they didn't have the freedom. So for me, the book really resonated, and I hope some of these characters come to some larger work at some point. For a first work of fiction, I really heartily congratulate you. Thank you so much for bringing it.
Thank you, Professor. Your words mean a lot. And let me tell you, women of all generations, across ages, have been subjected to this kind of, this kind of molestation, or call it what you will, within the family. And it's most families' worst kept secret, or the best kept secret, as you would say it. I mean, we saw it in Monsoon Wedding, we see it in every second household. And the saddest part is that your own mother or your own aunt is going to be covering up. And pretty much a story in every household.
Nandini, you're reminding all of us here who discussed Elif Shafak's book, 10 minutes and 38 seconds.
Yes.
And then, of course, in our conversation, I talked about the matriarchy and patriarchy and the patriarchy and matriarchy. Yeah. So I think that's a wonderful point that Smita made about your book, that's probably why it resonates, because simply told, it is the male desire, to go back to Butlerian theory, it is really the male desire which destroys brutally any semblance of women's dignity. And the biggest collusionists are other women in the family.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, both of you. I think you've brought out some very salient points in this collection. So Vinod, Mr. Vinod Pillai always has a wonderful take on our books. Please, Vinod, come to the fore.
Thank you, Julie, and good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Sen, for a lovely book, as I mentioned in the beginning itself, before this program was recorded. Now, there's a lot that I want to say. First of all, I loved the simplicity of your writing style. There are books which I read which are very heavy to read and which I need to labor through. This wasn't one of them, and I love such books because finally, you're making the process easy for me as a reader. As an academic, probably I would want to. I'm not an academic, by the way. I may love to read, literary flourishes and, examine what themes are there. But for a simple reader like me, I would like to just go along smoothly through the thing and enjoy the prose. And that happens here a lot. So I love this. And the other thing is also what has been quite often discussed about closure. Yeah, we all want a closure. We look forward because it makes life easy. But I think if I've been watching a lot of Malayalam movies recently, not because I'm a Malayali, but because those movies are really good now, of late. A lot of those movies don't have a closure. And I love them for it. I love them for it. Because at the end, you as a reader, you're given all this material and now you can do what you want with it. And also it's, as you yourself said, that quite often in life, life is a thing in a continuum and you see some portion of it and no story actually ends in life. So it makes it very, very realistic. And the other thing I found is that all the characters were very relatable. I love studying human beings, I watch them. That's one of my favorite hobbies. And therefore, quite often works of fiction where, the character looks totally unreal. I know that that person cannot exist. That doesn't fascinate me. But here in this book, every single character, is relatable and you can see what is happening to them. So that's again a great thing. What I found common in this book is that it's in all the stories, the central character is a woman. Even in the first one, where the narrator is a guy, but finally it's all about, the central character turns out to be a woman. And also, when it came to closure, I think Kaikai's probably is one where there is some kind of a closure, but in all the other stories, I think they left, open-ended for you to imagine what's going to happen after that. The other thing is that in all these cases, the central character being a woman, though there are other characters, the woman finally gets into a situation where maybe her making, maybe circumstances, whatever, that's immaterial. But there comes a situation where she finds it difficult to continue the docile, simple kind of character that she is. And she is finally forced to dig deep and find the strength in her, the Shakti in her, the Durga in her. And that's the point of transformation that happens in every single story here, except maybe Kaikeyi's. So that I found pretty interesting. That's how I looked at it. Found it very easy to read. I can't name any, particular story which I loved, because I loved all of them, honestly, because every one of them was relatable. Every one of them set me thinking. This transformation that happens, this last story of the Santal maid, there you find, the two are traveling in the bus, and then Haran was bewitched, and then his mind is being discussed. For this girl, he was willing to do anything. A new city with a new girl was exactly what he needed. And when he had his fill of her, he could also call in clients. A body like Bulki's was bound to fetch good money. So that's the way he's looking at her. And then you come to Bulki and you say, Bulki sat still in the bus with her eyes closed, letting her thoughts stray. She had gambled brazenly. She knew her presence in her son's life would earn him nothing but shame. People were bound to ask questions. The Roys would not be able to prevent him from being branded as a bastard. Never mind their story about her marriage and her dead husband. Yet she was secure in the knowledge that Karthik was indeed the apple of the Roy's eyes. They would bring him up as their own. She also knew she would have to fall really low for Baba and Ma to be forced to abandon her. From the trusting young girl who had given herself to Manik, Bulke had exited the cocoon of innocence forever. I think that this is the kind of thing that is there in every single movie, that there is that change happening. And then, of course, in this story, of course, her deliverance comes, when she jumps under the truck. That's a different thing. So I sort of enjoyed this whole thing, because to see people in difficult, be it man or woman, in a very difficult circumstance, and to see how they triumph over it in their own, unique way. That's something that fascinates me, and I got it in every one of these stories. Thank you so much, Dr. Sen.
Thank you. You are kind, is all I can say. Thank you so much. Thanks for the wonderful review that you've given.
Thank you, Vinod. As I said, a pleasure always, because you always see a positive side. It's a great pleasure for me to see what my MA student, Raka Mukherjee, has to say. Raka always brings in a very strong feminist perspective. So let's see, Nandini, what she has to give us. Raka, go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Dr. Sen. It's my privilege to be talking here today about the second wife and other stories. Before I say anything, I would like to, this is my question to Dr. Sen, that the idea of the title of the book, The Second Wife and Other Stories, is it just the second wife as a story and other stories, or the second wife as the second sex, or an other as the other gender, other as the woman? That is the first thought that came in my mind. And there are 4 stories which actually spoke to me a lot. That is Navonita, Deliverance, where the character of Joshna, Bela in the second wife, and Bulki as the Shautal maid. Now, for Navonita, Joshna, Bela, all the characters, what I found is all these characters had the idea of her body being used as the capital for consumption, as if they were offered on a plate for the male gaze, for the male satiation, and also the idea that they were all, not Navonita, but they were all in certain ways mothers, either mothers by surrogacy, if we call it, we call Bela a surrogate mother to her sister's children. If the Pulki as a mother, because Pulki and Joshna, both of them had male children, and I think that was God's grace over them, because what if they had girl children? They would not be respected. Karthik would not be the apple of the eye for the Roys, and Mrs. Chatterjee would not be so kind as to take care of Joshna after that. So for me, I think certain images, for example, Navonita's use of the boti as her as threatening Roti Babu. And women are always subjected, and performativity always comes up in my mind when Butler said that, gender performance and to keep the woman confined in the kitchen space in her roles. She is taking up the tune of the boti from the kitchen. And instead of being the food consumed by the man, for the first time, she's holding the boti up to his throat and saying, see, this is my time, and I have witnesses. The idea of the witness, I think uh, the idea of the story is not having a closure, but we also see that the closure could only come if we ask and if we talk to all these maids or the people who are witnesses to the crime, to the domestic abuse that is happening day by day, and also the women like Roti Babu's wife, who said that, she was getting old, so she had to keep her husband happy by traveling and allowing her own sister's daughter to be prey to the man's hunger or sexual desire. So I think what this book really brings to me, and as Dr. Sen and Dr. Mehta said, talked about The Choice of Motherhood by Buchi Emecheta, I have had the privilege of reading the book. The joys of motherhood and the identity of the woman. It made me think of Anahit Dashkar and the idea of being in exile from one's body and only reducing to the mind. Because all the four women here, what actually they did was they could not talk back to the patriarchy with their bodies, but they did so with their minds. So they were able to separate their minds from their bodies and were able to move forward, take a step forward, although they had to take 2 steps backward at every point in their lives. So I think that is what spoke to me the most. And I thank Dr. Sen for writing this. But also there's one little point that really made me think that I found a lot of similarity with the stories of Jhumpa Lahiri when I was reading through the story. So I want to ask Dr. Sen if she might have been one of her inspirations. And also the story of Koike. I had read this book called Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood, where the story of the Iliad is being told through Penelope's perspective. I think that was also a very fresh take to read. Thank you, and thank you for letting me become a part of this.
Thanks, Raka. Lovely perspectives. And I mean, I hadn't thought through the title mainly because the title was not of my suggesting. The title was kind of thrust upon me by the editor because, there is one factor which I had not bargained for at all, being an academic, hadn't even thought about it, which is the saleability. So when you have a certain catchy title, it works in a certain manner. Of course, I had a very sensitive editor. I cannot say that it was only for that, but then, she also had to look at the market. So I think, so that's where the title comes from, but I love your interpretation. That's fascinating. And yes, I'm so happy that you brought up this point, which I thought, it recurs in the text. We were talking about motherhood, but this sun fetish, I talk about it quite a lot and quite obviously, which we hadn't kind of discussed. So I'm so happy that you do bring it up and that you sort of engage with it. And and as far as my inspirations, now that is a tough one. See, I devour books. All my life, I just read like a maniac. So I've just read and read and read and read. So I don't know which specific author I would cite as an influence, but yes, Jhumpa Lahiri is one of my favorites for sure. But like the professor who was speaking earlier, she's talked about Ashapurna Devi, and I was so flattered when she said my book reminded her. So Ashapurna Devi, of course, is a huge influence. Mahashweta, of course, since I've worked on her, also had the privilege of knowing her as a person. So yeah, all of that. I think it's all the books that I read, and like I said, I devour books. I don't read them. I'm sort of I'm reading all the time. So everything was an influence.
Thank
so
you.
I'm so happy.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Nandini, I have to move on to the next speaker.
Oh,
Raka,
yes.
as always, never disappoints. Raka always, gives me something, typically in the last 3 years that I've known her in class, to come back and chew on, and she's done it again today. Nandini, I'm so happy that we got this response from a true scholar. Mrs. Shutapa Mukherjee, are you here? Shutapa, are you here?
Yes, hi, Julie. I'm very much here enjoying every bit of it. Thank you so much.
Shutapa is actually an amazing lady, wears many hats. And she's also a master's in English. She's a, advocate for writing. She's doing another master's in psychology. She's an advisor to the schools. So let's hear what you have to say. Just keep it within three minutes, my dear. Go for it.
Sure. Nandini, first and foremost, I feel so good having you among us. I mean, it's a very unique and rare treat, I must say. And thanks to Julie for, having you here with us. It's a different experience altogether when, you're there with the author and sharing your views and listening to what the author has to say. And congratulations, like somebody else, I think, mentioned before me, that this book actually, I was hooked onto it till the end once I picked it up. And the best, it was not as if I was reading something that I was not, that was something very new, something that was, that I wasn't, aware of, or something that we haven't been familiar with. It was something so familiar. You've been hearing these stories from your neighbors, from your parents, from your grandparents. So it's a very, very familiar situation that you are again encountering through the pages of this book. And at the same time, there was something that kept, driving the reader to go on and on, despite the familiarity. And I think that's because, again, because of the kind of spirit and the courage and the way you brought forward your women characters. And one thing that I noticed, especially after reading the first and the second, and I think even the third story, and then a few more, is that the endings were left loose. They were left to perhaps our imaginings. And I found that quite interesting. And here I just want to share that, sometimes, or rather most times, we like to see a very conclusive kind of an ending. And maybe because we've been fed with that, since our childhood. It's a social thing. I just want to share with all of you an incident. Once my elder son, he'd come back from his college in Delhi, and we were sitting in our balcony in Kolkata, and the younger one, I mean, there's a difference of 8 years. So he was sharing about what he's learning, and, it went on and on, the conversation. At the end of it, the young one asked us, you've been carrying on with Dada for so long, so what's the moral of the story? So I think we're all looking for that ending, that moral, that ending. And yet I would say, when we actually are left with a very loose end, instead of just closing the book and getting on with something mindfully, somehow that question keeps coming back. Like, for example, we know what happened to Raghav, right? But we don't get to know what happens to Geeta. So, at least for me, I kept thinking, what could have happened to Geeta? Or when there's, I just go through this here, in the second wife, when Bela gets, she goes down and she joins the procession. So again, we don't know what's happening. What's going to happen? Is she going to come back home? Will she be accepted there? Or will she kind of, just disappear with the people who are kind of, into this movement? Same, even in this lipstick, where she, like Nandini, you mentioned, and I loved it. I really loved that bit where, she's the one, the mother's coming out of the closet. I liked it so much because we're always talking about the others. We never talking about the parents who actually need to come out of the closet. And I really like that. And even there, she's quite sure that she'll meet her son, but no one knows. No one knows if she's actually going to meet her son, and if he's also going to come back to her both ways. So, then in Happy Times, she's brought Priya home. She has brought Priya home, but then once again, one doesn't know if she's going to carry on meeting Priya, look after Priya, or whatever. So a lot of it is left open for us to kind of think over and, really kind of. So I think the loose ending somehow really got me thinking, and I'm sure it's got a lot of your readers thinking. And here, in fact, I was reading about loose endings, and I found a very interesting quote, which basically says that this is by Victor Shklovsky, Russian and Soviet literary critic and writer. And he's pointed out so beautifully, quote, a novel can come to an end, but has no ending, because finishing a novel would mean knowing the future, and we don't know the future. I think, Nandini, you did mention this right at the start, that life is such, I mean, we don't know what's coming next. And it's not packaged there for us that this is going to be our ending. And maybe because of our conditioning, because of, because we always want to feel that, we've achieved something. So maybe people do look for a conclusive ending, but I think a lot of good work of art really doesn't, end it for you. And it makes you think, like we talk of poetry, and we say everybody has a right to interpret a poem in her or his own way. So when a story has a loose end, the reader is given a lot of, should I say, authority over the story to come to her own conclusion or his conclusion. And Nandini, looking for many, many more books from you. And waiting for your characters to also be the happy-go-lucky kinds. Yeah.
Okay, point noted. Yes.
Yeah, the women. Yeah.
Yes.
Free-spirited, happy-go-lucky kinds. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that Shklovsky quote as well. I think that sort of drives home the point about why Roland Barthes had said that with the death of the author comes the birth of the reader. Wonderful. Shutapa, to have you on board. Papia, are you there? Papia Mukherjee, are you there? Papia? Papia Mukherjee, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. Yeah, go ahead. Papia is another Loreto product and been a librarian for years. She's probably one of the best read people I know. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you very much, Nandini, for your bouquet of stories. I enjoyed them very much. They made me think. And I would say that not having a closure really interested me, actually, because life is like this, inconclusive. So the stories carry on. And of course, I found your language very simple and very easy to understand and get into the content of the stories. Your characters, I found the protagonists were everyday characters living their humdrum life, no matter in what situations they were. But it was a sudden, it was a turn in their lives, a situation, or a sort of a point change in their lives, which were either tragic or they were shocking. It was a shocking revelation. But these events, these situations kind of helped them to grow, to go, to carry on with their lives, of course, in a different way. We don't know what actually happens to them, especially like, say, in Nobunita and the others who showed a lot of courage in taking the situation.
under control, making their own decisions about their situations. But these characters, by going through these experiences, also they try to achieve a kind of wholeness, they try to become whole. And I realized that also that by trying to survive these situations, they don't lose sight of their goal. I wouldn't say survive so much, actually. They're survivors, but they long to live a much more, positive life, or they're aiming to be more leading a meaningful life. So they do not really survive. We don't call them survivors in that sense, So that is what I found interesting. And my favorite, of course, was the first, some of the favorites were the first story, because that I could relate to, having been to the University of North Bengal and having interacted with a lot of girls there who were actually involved in the movement. So that resonated with me. And of course, I loved Lipstick, and the way you say that, it was the mother who came out of the closet. Everybody has said that. And the story of Koike, of course, the second wife, again, who is much maligned by the mythology, but you see her point of view also, why she did what she had to do. And of course, Deliverance was another one which I loved. And so that's it. And thank you so much for these wonderful stories. And I hope you will go on writing some more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So very much. Thank you.
We've got the last speaker, and I am really excited because, as I said a little earlier, Ayushi Ray was my MA student, and I think she's blossomed. And like Raka, I'm sure she'll have a view that Nandini would like to hear. Ayushi, go right ahead, wrap up the evening.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening to everyone here. So all of the stories in this anthology centers around a woman. Some women are 18-year-old, while another one is a journalist in her mid-40s, while some other woman is a housemaker and a mother. The revolutions by them are not so loud and profound, yet they're impactful, and a simple gesture amplifying their win against patriarchy. Now, it seems like women of all ages and classes have come forward in this book to smash the patriarchy. And Ray has also included the story of a non-binary individual drawing our attention to the struggles that they continue to face even today, even from their own relations. But today, what I would talk about is about the elements of Bengali culture that is central to some of our stories. In the first story, Sapphire Ring talks about the Naxalite movement, the one that changed the definition of students' revolution forever in Kolkata, shook the very core of West Bengal in the 70s. We get a vivid, fast-hand description of how the movement was and the atrocity the students had to endure in the hands of the police and the government. It was in this movement that women leaders also came forward and equally held the battle, which we also find in this story. The protagonist of this story, Duttojit Banerjee, had betrayed his own brother for the sake of his love interest, and he is among the many hundreds who had testified against their closest friends and their blood to get away from this police brutality and lead a life away from all the humdrum. In the first part of the second story, where Napunita's aunt and uncle comes in, there is an elaborate description of the food that is being cooked for the guests, which gives an idea to the reader of the Bengali culture of making fancy arrangements for their guests, especially those who are economically in the higher section. In the final part of the story, we find Navonita using the boti, a very common sharp instrument found in the Bengali household, which ironically, time and again, has been the instrument of defense for many Bengali women. And here Navonita does the same. She takes up the boti to defend herself. In the performer, our heroine Meera, whose name, please correct me, ma'am, if I'm wrong, is an inspiration from Sunil Gangotay's muse in many of his poems and novels. And I found it absolutely wonderful, like connecting that Meera with this household, homemaker Meera. The fifth story title is Thammi, which is again a very Bengali theme. Thammi is what we call our paternal grandmother, lovingly, and also it's another intricate culture of the Bengali household is calling the house help Pishi or Mashi, which we also find here, the Jaba Pishi, who is also one of the main characters of the story. Here we find Thammi, a matriarch, again something we are acquainted with for those women who had lost their husband and had to take over a lot of responsibility at a very young age. The second wife reminds us of Shraddhachitra's Ghore Baire, of women stepping out, of breaking the parda and stepping out to fight for their country, to do everything they can for their country. Having said that, I would like to say to Nandini ma'am that since this was the title story, I expected a bit of more overwhelmingness, a bit of more, that thing, if I may say, from this story, which I think it's my low key here compared to the other stories. The deliverance, the rural aspects of Bengal has been portrayed, but there are one family ruling of the entire village. It is a very common picture in Bengal even at this age, and several women like Josna has to give up their life every day in the name of wedding because they absolutely cannot raise their voice against their families. All in all, this book explores many incidents of everyday India, and it brings women from these women can be found everywhere in my neighborhood, in the streets, everywhere, and shows that how women continues to give Agni Pariksha every day as they continue to be. Thank you, ma'am. This has been a wonderful read. I hope to see more of your work in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi. I loved every word you say and completely agree with everything that you had to say. Thanks a ton. You youngsters need to tell us how to move forward. So I keep looking at my students, and though I've not taught you, but you would be my student if I taught in your university. So I always look at my students for telling me what next, So thank you. Thank you, everyone. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed everything you said, Ayushi.
Nandini, how can I thank you? It's been absolutely marvelous. As you can see in our discussions, we've had a real freedom of connecting with you, and a comfort zone has been created by everybody. This is a very special quotient in a book club. And I am very, very honored that both Ajanta Datto as well as Dr. Smita Kothari have joined us. And Vivek has made the effort all the way from Manila. There's Vinod Pillai from Hyderabad. You are here from Delhi. It's just amazing how we've all put it together. Ayushi and Raka, Papia, Shutapa, and our own book club, Bengal Club readers like Anju Munshi, Dr. Choitali Moitro, all of you are just amazing. Sangeeta Kichlu, thank you so much. Till we meet again in June, I will let you know how we're going to do that, because we have about 4 books by our own members that we are going to be exploring. So 4 books of short stories should be fun. And we'll invite Nandini and Dr. Janta.
For sure. Let me just say this has been a wonderful experience with me. Thank you, Julie Dee. Thanks to each and every one of you who came and who educated me. It's been a huge learning process for me. Thank you so much. I take back each and every word that you have said. I'm so grateful that you took your time, you read my book, and you had such wonderful things to say. And they will remain, it's every word is etched in my mind. Thank you once again. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. And I'm eternally grateful. And I'm so happy that I got to know you people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nandini. It's been wonderful to have you all here. And have a lovely, lovely weekend. Bye for now. See you again. Bye. Bye.